The wrench slipped from Marcus Chen's oil-stained fingers as the emergency klaxons began their harsh wailing across Epsilon Station. He cursed under his breath, wiping his hands on the already filthy coveralls that had become his second skin over the past 3 years. Around him, the massive cargo bay echoed with the sounds of panic as dock workers scrambled to secure loose equipment, and civilians rushed toward the nearest emergency shelters. Commander Zoraketh's voice cut through the chaos over the station's communication system, her tone sharp and professional despite the underlying tension. All civilian personnel report to designated safe zones immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Marcus straightened slowly, his weathered hands finding the familiar weight of his tool belt. At 42, he had the look of a man who had spent his entire adult life elbow-deep in machinery. Gray streaked his black hair, and permanent grease stains marked his fingernails despite his best efforts to scrub them clean. To anyone watching, he was exactly what he appeared to be. Another grease monkey keeping the station's ancient systems running on prayers and spare parts. The truth was far more complicated. Through the reinforced viewport that dominated the cargo bay's far wall, Marcus could see them approaching. The hegemony fleet emerged from the swirling purple of hyperspace like metallic predators, their sleek hulls gleaming under the system's binary stars. 12 dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small city, accompanied by dozens of smaller escort vessels. The sight should have terrified him. Instead, Marcus found himself calculating firing solutions and defensive formations with the automatic precision of a mind trained for war. "Marcus!" A shout came from behind him. He turned to see Jenna Rodriguez, one of the station's junior engineers, her face pale with fear. "You need to get to the shelters. Commander Keth's orders." He nodded absently, but made no move to follow her as she hurried toward the emergency corridors. Instead, he walked closer to the viewport, studying the approaching fleet with eyes that missed nothing. The formation was textbook hegemony doctrine, designed for maximum intimidation rather than tactical efficiency. They weren't expecting resistance. Why would they? Epsilon Station was a backwater trading post on the edge of human space, defended by nothing more than a handful of patrol ships and some outdated orbital platforms. The station shuddered as the first hegemony vessels moved into bombardment range. Marcus could feel the vibration through the deck plating, a deep thrumming that spoke of massive energies being brought to bear. Emergency lighting flickered to life as the main power grid automatically shifted to defensive configurations. Red warning lights bathed everything in an hellish glow. Marcus activated his personal communicator, switching to a frequency that officially didn't exist. "Control, this is Wrench. Requesting status update." The response came immediately, the voice crisp and professional despite the coded nature of the transmission. "Wrench, this is Control. Hegemony Fleet has achieved tactical position. Station defenses are minimal. Estimated time to surrender demand, 14 minutes. Understood, Control. What's the word from home?" There was a pause, longer than Marcus liked. When Control spoke again, the tension was unmistakable. "Wrench, you're designated as deep cover asset. Maintain identity unless Code 7 protocols are initiated. Repeat, maintain current identity." Marcus closed the channel without responding. Code 7 meant the situation had deteriorated beyond normal parameters. It meant Earth wasn't sending help. Epsilon Station and its 12,000 inhabitants were on their own. The deck shuddered again, more violently this time. Through the viewport, Marcus could see one of the station's defensive platforms erupting in a brief, brilliant flower of flame before going dark. The hegemony wasn't even bothering to negotiate first. They were making a statement. "All hands, this is Commander Keth." Her voice echoed through the cargo bay from speakers mounted high on the bulkheads. "I won't lie to you. We're outgunned and outnumbered. But this station has been humanity's gateway to this sector for 23 years. We've built something here worth defending. All military personnel report to battle stations. All civilians maintain position in designated shelters." Marcus found himself smiling grimly. Zoraketh had been commander of Epsilon Station for 18 months, and in that time, she had proven herself to be exactly the kind of officer the frontier needed. Competent, decisive, and utterly unwilling to back down from a fight. She was also completely unaware that the man she occasionally nodded to in the corridors, the one who had fixed her personal transport's atmospheric recycler last month, had once been Admiral Marcus Chun of the Earth Defense Force. The irony wasn't lost on him. 3 years ago, he had been one of the most decorated officers in human space, the man who had broken the hegemony's advance at the Battle of New Kyoto. Now he was just another mechanic, invisible and ignored, exactly as his handlers had intended when they'd faked his death and given him this new identity. Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered and went out for several seconds before the backup systems kicked in. In the brief darkness, Marcus made his decision. Code 7 protocols or not, he wasn't going to stand by and watch Epsilon Station burn. He made his way through the increasingly empty corridors toward his quarters, a small compartment in the station's industrial section that he shared with 2 other maintenance workers. Neither of his roommates were present, having presumably followed orders and reported to the shelters. Marcus was grateful for the privacy as he knelt beside his narrow bunk and activated a hidden panel in the deck plating. The compartment that opened contained items that no simple mechanic should possess. A military-grade tactical display unit, still warm from its constant monitoring of fleet communications. A set of credentials that would grant him access to any Earth Defense Force facility. And a small, innocuous-looking device that would, when activated, upload his real identity to the station's computer system and grant him full administrative access. Marcus stared at the device for a long moment. Once he used it, there would be no going back. His cover would be blown, his carefully constructed new life destroyed. But 12,000 people were about to die, and he was the only one on the station with the knowledge and experience to prevent it. The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. He activated the device. Immediately, his personal communicator began chiming with incoming priority messages. The station's computer system, suddenly, recognizing him as Admiral Marcus Chun, was updating his access levels and feeding him tactical data. What he saw made his blood run cold. The hegemony fleet was even larger than he had initially estimated. 18 dreadnoughts, not 12, with a full support fleet that included troop transports and planetary bombardment ships. This wasn't just a raid or a show of force. This was a full-scale invasion, designed to claim Epsilon Station and use it as a forward base for operations deeper into human space. Marcus pulled up the station's defensive capabilities and felt his heart sink. 6 orbital platforms, 4 of which were already damaged or destroyed. A dozen patrol ships, none of them larger than a corvette. And the station's own defensive systems, which had been designed to deal with pirates and smugglers, not a hegemony battle fleet. It was hopeless. Any conventional defense would last perhaps 20 minutes before being overwhelmed. But Marcus Chun hadn't become one of humanity's greatest military minds by thinking conventionally. He began pulling up schematics, his fingers flying over the tactical display as he called up everything the station's computers knew about the approaching fleet. Hegemony ships were powerful, but they followed predictable patterns. Their commanders were trained in academies that valued orthodoxy over innovation. They would expect the station to either surrender immediately or mount a desperate, but futile defense using conventional tactics. They wouldn't expect what Marcus was planning. His communicator chimed again. This time, it was a direct channel from the command center. Commander Ket's face appeared on the screen, her expression tight with stress and confusion. "I don't know who you are or how you gained access to our military networks," she said without preamble. "But you need to identify yourself immediately. We're tracking an unauthorized access from your location." Marcus looked at her for a moment, this young woman who had been doing her best to hold together a frontier station with minimal resources and no support from Earth. She deserved better than the hand she'd been dealt. They all did. "Commander," he said quietly, "my name is Marcus Chun. Until 3 years ago, I held the rank of Admiral in the Earth Defense Force. I'm here to help." The expression on Ket's face went through several rapid changes. Disbelief, recognition, and finally a kind of desperate hope. She had heard the name, of course. Every officer in human space knew about Admiral Chun and the Battle of New Kyoto. "You're supposed to be dead," she said finally. "I got better," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "Commander, we don't have much time. The hegemony fleet is going to demand surrender in approximately 8 minutes. When you refuse, they'll begin bombardment immediately afterward. When I refuse?" Ket's voice carried a note of steel. "Admiral, I have 12,000 civilians on this station. If there's no hope of victory—" "There's always hope, Commander. But not if we fight them the way they expect us to fight. I need you to trust me." Through the viewport in his quarters, Marcus could see the hegemony fleet settling into final attack positions. The massive dreadnoughts hung in space like sleeping giants, their weapon ports beginning to glow with the telltale energy buildup that preceded orbital bombardment. "What do you need?" Keth asked. Marcus began outlining his plan, speaking quickly and efficiently as precious seconds ticked away. As he talked, he could see the commander's expression shift from skepticism to amazement to something that might have been the first glimmers of hope she'd felt since the enemy fleet had arrived. "That's completely insane," she said when he finished. "Yes," Marcus agreed. "It is, but it's also our only chance." The communicator crackled with an incoming transmission on all emergency frequencies. The voice that emerged was cold, mechanical, processed through translation software that stripped away any trace of emotion or humanity. "Epsilon Station. This is Fleet Commander Voss of the Hegemony 4th Battle Group. You will surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your facility and the execution of all personnel. You have 5 minutes to comply." Commander Keth looked at Marcus through the communicator screen. "Admiral, if this doesn't work, then we'll go down fighting," Marcus said simply. "But, Commander, it's going to work. I stake my reputation on it." For the first time since the crisis began, Zara Keth smiled. "Admiral, your reputation is that you've never lost a battle." "Exactly," Marcus said, and closed the channel. He began moving through the station with purpose now, no longer bothering to maintain his cover as a simple mechanic. The corridors were mostly empty, with civilians huddled in emergency shelters and military personnel at their posts, but the few people he encountered didn't give him a second glance. In the chaos of the approaching battle, one more person moving with authority was hardly noteworthy. Marcus made his way to the station's primary engineering section, a massive chamber filled with the humming machinery that kept Epsilon Station alive. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal, and the deck vibrated constantly from the massive fusion reactors that powered the facility. Chief Engineer Sarah Williams looked up as he entered, her face streaked with sweat and her expression harried. She was trying to coordinate damage control efforts while simultaneously keeping the station's power grid stable under the stress of combat conditions. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded. "This is a restricted area." Marcus activated his newly restored credentials, and Williams' expression changed as her personal scanner identified him. "Admiral Chun? But how are you?" "Long story, Chief. Right now I need you to prepare for emergency power redistribution on my command. We're going to be drawing massive amounts of energy from the main reactors, far beyond normal parameters." Williams looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "Admiral, the reactors are already running at 80% capacity. If we push them beyond redline specifications, they'll overload and destroy the station," Marcus finished for her. "I know, but, Chief, in about 3 minutes, the hegemony is going to start bombarding us anyway. We're going to lose the station regardless, unless we do something they don't expect." The chief engineer stared at him for a moment, then nodded grimly. "What do you need?" Marcus began outlining the power requirements for his plan, watching Williams' face grow paler as the scope of what he was proposing became clear. What he was asking for was theoretically possible, but it would require pushing every system on the station beyond its design limits. If any component failed at the wrong moment, the resulting cascade failure would vaporize Epsilon Station more thoroughly than any hegemony bombardment. "Admiral," Williams said when he finished, "this is either the most brilliant tactical maneuver in military history or the most elaborate suicide in recorded warfare." "Probably both," Marcus admitted. "Can you do it?" Williams was already moving toward the main control console, her fingers flying over the interface as she began rerouting power conduits and recalibrating safety systems. "Give me 2 minutes to prep the reactors, then we'll find out if this old station has one more miracle left in her." Marcus's communicator chimed with an incoming message from the command center. Commander Keth's voice was tense, but controlled. "Admiral, the hegemony fleet is moving into final bombardment position. Still no word from Earth Fleet Command." "Understood, Commander. Maintain radio silence until I give you the signal." And Zura, he used her first name deliberately, a reminder that they were beyond formal military protocol now. "When this starts, it's going to get rough. Make sure your people are strapped in." "Copy that, Admiral. Engineering reports ready for power redistribution on your command." Marcus closed the channel and looked around the engineering section. Chief Williams and her Her team were working frantically to prepare systems that had never been designed for what he was about to ask of them. In a few minutes, every person on Epsilon Station would be depending on their skill and expertise. No pressure at all. The station shuddered again as the hegemony fleet moved closer. Through the engineering section's small viewport, Marcus could see the enemy ships assuming their final attack positions. The lead dreadnought was already powering its main guns, energy readings spiking as its massive capacitors charged. "Admiral," Williams called out, "reactors are ready. All safety protocols are overridden and we're standing by for emergency power surge." "But, sir, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about this?" Marcus thought about the 12,000 people sheltering throughout the station, about Commander Keth and her crew preparing to make their last stand, about the Earth Defense Force that had written off Epsilon Station as expendable. He thought about 3 years of hiding, of pretending to be someone he wasn't, of watching from the sidelines while other people fought and died. "Chief," he said quietly, "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." His communicator crackled with the final transmission from Fleet Commander Voss. "Epsilon Station, your time has expired. Prepare for bombardment." Marcus keyed his communicator to the command frequency. "Commander Keth, this is Admiral Chun. Execute Operation Lazarus on my mark." He paused, watching the tactical display as the hegemony dreadnought's weapon systems reached full charge. Mark, what happened next would be remembered as either the most audacious military maneuver in human history or the most spectacular failure. But as the plan Marcus had conceived began to unfold, one thing became clear to every person on Epsilon Station. Their quiet, unassuming mechanic had just revealed himself to be something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The moment Marcus gave the order, Epsilon Station transformed from a helpless civilian outpost into something that defied every tactical manual in known space. The change began in the engineering section, where Chief Williams watched her instruments spike beyond anything she had ever seen. Power readings climbed past redline specifications, past emergency thresholds, past the theoretical maximum output of the station's fusion reactors. "Reactor output at 120%, Williams called out, her voice tight with tension. "Hull stress monitors are screaming warnings. Admiral, we're pushing into uncharted territory here." Marcus watched the tactical display with the calm focus that had made him legendary among Earth Defense Force officers. The hegemony fleet was moving with predictable precision, their dreadnoughts aligning for the bombardment that would reduce Epsilon Station to scrap metal and vapor. What they couldn't see, what no enemy in the history of human warfare had ever seen, was what Marcus had spent 3 years quietly preparing for. "Phase 1 complete," he announced over the command channel. "Commander Keth, initiate station rotation. Emergency thrusters to maximum burn." From the outside, what happened next must have looked like mechanical failure to the hegemony observers. Epsilon Station, which had been maintaining its standard orbital position with gentle precision, suddenly began spinning on its central axis. Emergency thruster ports that were meant for minor positional adjustments roared to life with massive burns that sent the entire structure into a controlled tumble. But this wasn't system failure. This was carefully choreographed chaos. For 3 years, Marcus had used his position as a maintenance worker to modify systems throughout the station. A recalibrated thruster here, a rerouted power coupling there. Adjustments so subtle that they went unnoticed by station personnel, but which, when activated simultaneously, transformed Epsilon Station into something unprecedented in military history. A weaponized space station. "Hull integrity holding," Williams reported, though her voice carried notes of disbelief. "Somehow we're keeping everything together, but, Admiral, the stress readings." "Trust the modifications, Chief," Marcus said calmly. "Phase 2. Activate hidden weapon ports." Throughout the station's hull, panels that had appeared to be simple maintenance hatches suddenly opened to reveal weapon systems that officially didn't exist. Marcus had spent months cannibalizing parts from decommissioned patrol ships, salvaging weapons from the station scrapyard, and building entirely new systems from components that could be ordered without raising suspicions. The result was a collection of particle beams, missile launchers, and electromagnetic pulse generators that would have impressed even Earth Defense Force engineers. They weren't the massive weapons that would be found on a proper warship, but they didn't need to be. What mattered was that the hegemony had never encountered anything like them. "Commander Keth," Marcus said into his communicator. You have weapons control. Target the lead dreadnought's sensor array and fire at will. The first barrage from Epsilon Station's hidden weapons caught the hegemony fleet completely off guard. Streams of particle beam fire lashed out from the spinning station, striking the lead dreadnought with precision that spoke of professional military targeting. The massive ship's shields absorbed the damage easily enough, but the psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Fleet Commander Voss's voice cut through the communication channels, no longer cold and mechanical, but sharp with confusion and anger. All ships, the station is armed. Repeat, the station is armed. Begin evasive maneuvers and return fire. But the hegemony fleet was positioned for bombardment, not ship-to-ship combat. Their formations were optimized for overwhelming a stationary target, not for dealing with something that fought back. As Epsilon Station continued its seemingly chaotic tumble, its weapons kept firing from unexpected angles, each shot carefully calculated to hit where the enemy's shields were weakest. Direct hit on target's sensor dome, reported Lieutenant Sanders from the Weapons Control Center. Their targeting systems are degraded. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The first phase of his plan was working perfectly. By hitting the lead dreadnought sensors, he had forced the hegemony commander into a tactical dilemma. Voss could either pull back to reassess the situation, which would break the momentum of his attack, or he could proceed with degraded intelligence, which would make coordination between his ships much more difficult. The hegemony commander chose aggression. All ships, maintain attack formation. Concentrate fire on the station. Whatever weapons they have hidden, they can't possibly match our firepower. It was exactly the response Marcus had hoped for. The hegemony dreadnoughts began their bombardment, massive energy beams lancing out toward Epsilon Station. But their target was no longer where their tactical computers expected it to be. Phase 3, Marcus announced. Emergency translation, Mark. What happened next violated every principle of safe space navigation. Epsilon Station's main drive, which was designed for minor orbital adjustments, suddenly erupted with power that transformed the massive structure into something resembling a ship. The station lurched sideways with acceleration that should have torn it apart, sliding out of the path of the incoming bombardment by mere kilometers. The hegemony energy beams struck empty space where the station had been moments before. For the first time in recorded history, a space station had successfully executed evasive maneuvers. Chief Williams's voice crackled over the intercom, tinged with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Structural integrity at 60% and falling. Admiral, we can't keep this up much longer. We don't need much longer, Marcus replied, his attention focused on the tactical display. The hegemony fleet was beginning to adapt to the unexpected resistance, but their ships were still arranged for bombardment rather than ship-to-ship combat. More importantly, they were bunched together in a formation that maximized their firepower while making them vulnerable to exactly the kind of attack Marcus had in mind. Commander Keth, prepare for Phase 4. This is going to be the big one. Across the station, every person who wasn't already strapped and found something to hold onto as Epsilon Station's rotation suddenly reversed direction. The massive structure performed a maneuver that would have been impressive for a destroyer, impossible for a battleship, and absolutely unthinkable for a space station. As the station spun, its hidden weapons continued firing, but now they were targeting a different kind of objective. Instead of aiming for the hegemony ships directly, the particle beams began hitting specific points in space, creating a pattern that only became clear when viewed from the right perspective. Marcus was laying a trap. Admiral, came Lieutenant Sanders' voice. The hegemony ships are adjusting formation. They're spreading out to avoid concentrated fire. Let them, Marcus said calmly. They're moving exactly where I want them. The truth was that every shot Epsilon Station had fired, every maneuver it had executed, had been designed to herd the hegemony fleet into a specific area of space. Marcus had studied the tactical preferences of hegemony commanders for years, and he knew they would respond to pressure by adopting a defensive formation that prioritized mutual support over mobility. They were making themselves sitting ducks. Phase 4 initiated, Marcus announced. All hands, brace for maximum acceleration. Epsilon Station's drive systems, already pushed far beyond their design specifications, began drawing power directly from the main fusion reactors. The entire structure shuddered as forces that would have crushed a smaller ship tried to tear it apart. Emergency alarms wailed throughout the corridors as hull stress reached critical levels. But the station held together, if barely, as it accelerated toward the hegemony fleet at a speed that no space station should have been able to achieve. Fleet Commander Voss's voice cut through the communication channels, no longer controlled but openly panicked. All ships, the station is on a collision course. Repeat, the station is attempting a ramming attack. Open fire, maximum rate, all weapons. The space around Epsilon Station erupted in weapon fire as 18 hegemony dreadnoughts opened up simultaneously. Energy beams and missile barges filled the void with deadly light, more firepower than had been unleashed in any single engagement since the Battle of New Kyoto. But Marcus wasn't planning to ram the enemy fleet. At the last possible moment, when collisions seemed inevitable, Epsilon Station executed one final, impossible maneuver. Using every thruster, every emergency system, every modification Marcus had spent 3 years installing, the massive structure suddenly decelerated and rolled to starboard, sliding past the hegemony formation like a dancer, avoiding a clumsy partner. As it passed through the enemy fleet, Epsilon Station deployed its final surprise. Hidden throughout the station's hull were magnetic mines, dozens of them, each one disguised as routine maintenance equipment. As the station swept past the hegemony ships, the mines detached and used their own small propulsion systems to attach themselves to enemy hulls. All mines deployed and attached, reported Chief Williams. Detonation in 10 seconds. The hegemony fleet had moments to realize what had happened, but no time to react. The mines were military-grade devices, each one carrying enough explosive power to breach a battleship's armor. When they detonated simultaneously, the effect was devastating. 3 dreadnoughts were destroyed outright, their hulls torn open by explosions that sent atmosphere and debris streaming into space. 5 more were crippled, their weapons systems offline, and their crews struggling to contain massive hull breaches. The remaining ships found themselves scattered and disorganized, their careful formation shattered by an attack they had never seen coming. Hegemony fleet casualties confirmed, Lieutenant Sanders reported, his voice filled with amazement. Multiple ships destroyed or disabled. The survivors are falling back. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but only a moment. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the battle was far from over. The surviving hegemony ships would regroup, and when they returned, they would be prepared for unconventional tactics. More importantly, word of what had happened would spread throughout the galaxy. The secret that Marcus had maintained for 3 years was blown. Admiral Marcus Chun was alive, and he had just reminded everyone why he was considered one of the most dangerous military minds in human space. His communicator crackled with an incoming transmission from Commander Keth. Her face appeared on the screen, streaked with sweat and grime, but alive with the fierce joy of victory. "Admiral Chun," she said formally, then broke into a grin. "That was the most insane, brilliant, and terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. How in the hell did you plan all of this?" 3 years of very careful preparation, Marcus replied, and the knowledge that sometimes the best defense is a completely unhinged offense. Through the viewports around the station, they could see the surviving hegemony ships limping away, their formations broken and their confidence shattered. But Marcus knew this reprieve wouldn't last long. Fleet Commander Voss would call for reinforcements, and the next wave of attackers would be prepared for Epsilon Station's unconventional defenses. "Commander," he said quietly, "we need to talk. All of us. Because what we just accomplished was only the beginning." As if summoned by his words, Chief Williams appeared on the command deck, her face grimy but determined. Behind her came Lieutenant Sanders and the rest of the senior staff, the people who had trusted a man they thought was just a mechanic and found themselves part of the most unlikely military victory in recent memory. "Admiral," Williams said without preamble, "I've got damage reports from all sections. We're hurt, but we're alive. More importantly, I think I'm beginning to understand what you've really been doing for the past 3 years." Marcus nodded. There was no point in maintaining any pretense now. "I've been preparing for exactly this scenario. Earth Command wrote off the frontier stations years ago. When the hegemony came, we were supposed to be on our own. But you didn't accept that," Commander Keth said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Marcus replied simply. "I didn't. And neither should you." He activated the main tactical display, showing the positions of the retreating hegemony fleet and the scattered debris from their destroyed ships. What we just proved is that humans don't need massive fleets and overwhelming firepower to win battles. We need innovation, courage, and the willingness to do things that our enemies think are impossible. The hegemony will be back, Lieutenant Sanders pointed out. And next time they'll be ready for our tricks. Marcus smiled, and something in his expression made several people take an involuntary step back. Then, we'll just have to come up with new tricks. Because, ladies and gentlemen, Epsilon Station just became the most important military installation in this sector. He began outlining his vision for the station's future, describing modifications and improvements that would transform it from a simple trading post into a fortress that could stand against entire fleets. As he talked, the faces around him shifted from exhaustion to amazement to something that might have been hope. For 3 years, Marcus Chun had been content to hide in plain sight, just another mechanic keeping the machinery running. But the battle for Epsilon Station had changed everything. The mask was off, the secret was revealed, and the most dangerous admiral in human space was ready to remind the galaxy why humanity refused to go quietly into the night. The hegemony had made a critical error. They had awakened a sleeping giant, and that giant was very, very angry. In the depths of space, the surviving hegemony ships continued their retreat, carrying with them news that would shake the foundations of the galactic order. A backwater human station had not only survived their attack, but had turned the tables and inflicted devastating casualties on forces that should have overwhelmed it easily. More disturbing than the defeat itself was the tactical innovation they had witnessed. The humans had weaponized a space station, turned civilian infrastructure into a combat platform that fought like a warship while maintaining the defensive advantages of a fixed position. Fleet Commander Voss, his flagship limping home with massive damage to its hull, sent a priority message to Hegemony's Central Command. The humans, he reported, were far more dangerous than anyone had realized. They possessed a military leader of exceptional skill, and they had demonstrated a willingness to ignore conventional tactical doctrine in favor of strategies that bordered on madness. The response from Central Command was swift and uncompromising. Whatever had happened at Epsilon Station could not be allowed to spread. If humanity was developing new forms of warfare, those innovations had to be crushed before they could proliferate. A new fleet would be assembled, one large enough to overwhelm any defense the humans could mount. This time, there would be no survivors, no witnesses, and no chance for their tactical innovations to be studied and replicated. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for centuries through overwhelming force and predictable tactics. They would not allow a species of primitive mammals to upset that order, no matter how cleverly those mammals fought. But as Fleet Commander Voss composed his reports and Central Command began assembling their overwhelming response, none of them truly understood what they were dealing with. Marcus Chun hadn't just defended a space station. He had fired the opening shot in a war that would reshape the entire galaxy. A war where humanity's greatest strength wouldn't be their technology or their numbers, but their absolute refusal to fight fair. The battle for Epsilon Station was over. The war for human survival was just beginning. 2 weeks after the battle, Epsilon Station had transformed into something unrecognizable. What had once been a quiet trading post now buzzed with activity as engineers, technicians, and volunteers worked around the clock to implement Marcus Chen's increasingly ambitious modifications. The secret was out, and with it came resources and personnel that the station had never seen before. Commander Zura Keth stood in the primary observation deck, watching teams of workers install what appeared to be decorative hull plating, but was actually sophisticated armor designed to Marcus's specifications. Below her, the docking bays swarmed with ships that had arrived from across human space, carrying everything from advanced weapon systems to the finest military minds Earth had to offer. The irony wasn't lost on her. For months, she had requisitioned supplies, begged for reinforcements, and pleaded with Earth Command for support. Now that the galaxy knew Admiral Marcus Chun was alive and operating from Epsilon Station, suddenly everyone wanted to help. "Commander," came a voice from behind her. She turned to find Marcus approaching, still wearing the oil-stained coveralls that had been his disguise for 3 years. Despite his newfound prominence, he seemed reluctant to abandon the identity that had served him so well. "Admiral," she replied then, caught herself. Marcus, I still can't get used to calling you that. He smiled, and she was struck by how much he had changed since revealing his true identity. The quiet mechanic who had nodded politely in the corridors was gone, replaced by someone who radiated the kind of confidence that came with commanding fleets and winning impossible battles. I've been reviewing the intelligence reports from Earth Command, he said without preamble. The hegemony response is going to be massive. They're assembling the largest fleet in their recorded history, over 200 ships, including some of their newest dreadnought designs. Keth felt her stomach drop. 200 ships? Marcus, we barely survived 12. Even with all these modifications, we're not going to fight them the same way. Marcus interrupted. Zara, the battle 2 weeks ago was just the opening move. What we're building here isn't just a better defense for Epsilon Station. We're creating a new kind of warfare. He activated a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional representation of the surrounding star system. Red dots marked incoming hegemony forces, while blue indicators showed human positions. The numbers were overwhelming, but Marcus seemed unperturbed by the odds. The hegemony expects us to fortify the station and wait for them to arrive, he continued. Standard defensive doctrine says we should create overlapping fields of fire, establish kill zones, and try to maximize the cost of any assault. They've probably already calculated acceptable casualty rates for overwhelming our defenses. And we're not going to do that. Marcus's smile turned predatory. We're going to do something they'll never expect. We're going to attack them. Before Keth could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the observation deck. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as the station's defensive systems detected incoming ships dropping out of hyperspace. For a moment, Keth's heart raced, thinking the hegemony had arrived ahead of schedule. Then, Lieutenant Sanders' voice came over the communication system, tinged with excitement rather than alarm. All hands, we have incoming friendly vessels. Multiple Earth Defense Force ships requesting permission to dock. Through the observation deck's massive viewport, they could see the new arrivals emerging from the swirling energy of hyperspace translation. A dozen ships, led by what appeared to be a modified battlecruiser, whose lines were familiar, yet somehow different. That's the EDF Prometheus, Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Captain Sarah Voss, one of the finest tactical minds in the fleet. I served with her during the Rigel campaign. Voss. Keth couldn't help but notice the name. Any relation to the hegemony commander who attacked us? His sister. Actually, Marcus replied casually. The Voss family has a long military tradition on both sides of this conflict. Sarah chose humanity when the war started. Her brother chose differently. The implications of that family drama were staggering. But before Keth could ask for details, her communicator chimed with an incoming transmission. The screen flickered to life, showing a woman in her early 40s with steel-gray eyes and the kind of bearing that spoke of command authority. Epsilon Station, this is Captain Sarah Voss of the EDF Prometheus, requesting permission to dock and transfer personnel. We're carrying some equipment that Admiral Chun specifically requested. Marcus leaned into the communication pickup. Permission granted, Captain. Bay 7 is cleared for your approach. And, Sarah, it's good to see you again. The woman's stern expression softened slightly. Admiral, when we heard you were alive, let's just say Earth Command suddenly found a great deal of enthusiasm for supporting frontier operations. We brought everything you asked for, and a few surprises besides. As the Prometheus maneuvered toward the docking bay, Marcus turned back to Keth. What's about to come aboard this station is going to change the balance of power in this entire sector. But, Zara, I need you to understand something. Once we implement these modifications, once we deploy these new systems, there's no going back. The hegemony will never stop hunting us. Keth looked out at the approaching ships, thinking about the 12,000 civilians who called Epsilon Station home, about the hundreds of Earth Defense Force personnel who were arriving to support their desperate cause, about the impossible odds they faced against an enemy that outgunned them 200 to 1. Marcus, she said finally, 3 weeks ago, I thought we were going to die quietly and be forgotten by history. Now you're telling me we might die loudly and change the course of the war. I know which one I prefer. The docking process took several hours, complicated by the unusual nature of some of the cargo being transferred. Marcus had made specific requests for equipment that didn't officially exist, weapons systems that had been developed in secret research facilities and never deployed. Now, as teams of technicians began unloading crates marked only with cryptic alphanumeric codes, the true scope of his preparations became clear. Chief Williams met them in Docking Bay 7, her face flushed with excitement as she supervised the transfer operations. "Admiral, this equipment. Where did Earth Command even get half of this stuff?" "Secret projects that have been in development for years," Marcus replied. "Most of them were considered too dangerous or too unpredictable for standard deployment. Fortunately, our current situation is neither standard nor predictable." One of the crates being unloaded caught Keth's attention. It was nearly the size of a shuttle, marked with warning symbols that indicated both high explosives and exotic radiation hazards. "What exactly is in there?" "A prototype gravitational resonance weapon," Captain Voss answered as she approached the group. "It's designed to create localized spatial distortions that can disrupt ship formations or, if properly configured, cause enemy vessels to literally tear themselves apart." Keth stared at the massive crate. "And you're planning to mount this on a space station?" "Not mount," Marcus corrected. "Integrate. What we're building here isn't just a better defended station, Zara. We're creating something entirely new, a hybrid between a fortress and a ship that can defend itself using technologies the hegemony has never encountered." Over the following days, Epsilon Station continued its transformation. The gravitational resonance weapon was installed in a specially constructed chamber deep within the station's core, surrounded by the kind of shielding typically found on experimental research facilities. Meanwhile, teams of engineers began implementing modifications that seemed to defy conventional understanding of space station design. The station's rotation was increased and stabilized using gyroscopic systems that allowed for much more precise maneuvering. Additional thruster arrays were installed throughout the hull, turning the massive structure into something that could move like a ship while maintaining the structural integrity of a fixed installation. Most impressive were the weapon systems. In addition to the hidden armaments that had surprised the first hegemony attack, Marcus was installing weapons that belonged on dreadnoughts, not space stations. Particle beam cannons that could punch through battleship armor, missile launchers with targeting systems sophisticated enough to hit maneuvering fighters, and defensive systems that created overlapping fields of protection around the entire structure. But the most significant change was happening to the people aboard Epsilon Station. The arrival of Earth Defense Force personnel had brought with it a new sense of purpose and professionalism. Civilian engineers worked alongside military specialists, learning techniques and technologies that transformed them from maintenance workers into skilled combat technicians. Marcus made a point of involving everyone in the preparations, regardless of their background or training. The barista from civilian quarters found herself learning to operate targeting computers. The accountant who had managed shipping manifests was now coordinating supply chains for military equipment. The station's population was becoming something unprecedented, a civilian-military hybrid force that combined professional expertise with the kind of innovation that came from desperation. Commander Keth observed these changes with a mixture of admiration and concern. The transformation was remarkable, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Her concerns deepened when she discovered what Marcus was doing in his spare time. She found him in one of the station's smaller workshops, bent over a workbench covered with components that she didn't recognize. The smell of ozone and hot metal filled the air, and diagnostic equipment hummed quietly in the background. "Working late again?" she asked, stepping into the workshop. Marcus looked up from his work, and she was startled by the intensity in his eyes. "Personal project," he said simply. "Something I've been developing for the past 3 years." "What kind of personal project?" Instead of answering directly, Marcus activated a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional schematic. What appeared was unlike anything Keth had ever seen, a device that seemed to combine elements of a weapon, a communication system, and something that might have been a computer interface. "It's a neural link," Marcus explained. "A direct connection between human consciousness and ship systems. With this, a single operator can control multiple vessels simultaneously, coordinate complex maneuvers with perfect precision, and react to threats faster than any conventional command structure." Keth felt a chill run down her spine. "Marcus, neural interface technology is banned by about 12 different treaties. The psychological risks alone." "The psychological risks are considerable," Marcus agreed. "But so is facing a hegemony fleet of 200 ships with conventional tactics." "Zara, What we're planning requires coordination that's beyond normal human capabilities. We need every advantage we can get. And you're planning to use this thing yourself? Marcus set down the tool he had been holding and looked at her directly. I'm planning to become something the hegemony has never faced before. A human consciousness directly linked to the most advanced combat systems in known space. It might be the only way to level the odds. The implications were staggering. Neural interface technology had been abandoned by most civilizations because of its tendency to cause psychological fragmentation, addiction, and, in extreme cases, complete dissociation from reality. The few species that had continued experimenting with direct neural links had produced individuals of immense capability who were barely recognizable as their original species. Marcus, Keth said quietly, if this goes wrong, if the interface damages your mind, then someone else will have to finish what we started, he replied simply. But, Zara, I've run every simulation, analyzed every possible scenario. Conventional tactics won't work against what's coming. We need something revolutionary, something the hegemony can't predict or counter. Before she could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station. This time, they weren't announcing the arrival of friendly forces. Lieutenant Sanders' voice cut through the noise, tense with urgency. All hands, long-range sensors are detecting massive hyperspace distortions at the edge of the system. Multiple contacts, classification unknown, but consistent with large fleet formations. Estimated arrival time, 6 hours. Marcus and Keth exchanged glances, both understanding what this meant. The hegemony response fleet had arrived, and it was exactly as large as intelligence reports had predicted. 200 ships, including some of the most advanced vessels in their arsenal, commanded by officers who were undoubtedly prepared for unconventional human tactics. 6 hours, Marcus said thoughtfully. Enough time to complete the neural interface and conduct final systems checks. Marcus, you can't seriously be considering. The hegemony is coming with overwhelming force because they think they understand how humans fight, Marcus interrupted. They expect us to use conventional tactics, to fight like a proper military force with predictable strategies and acceptable casualty rates. They're not prepared for what we're about to become. He began moving through the workshop, gathering components and tools with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed these actions many times. Zara, I need you to coordinate the final preparations. Make sure every system is online, every weapon is charged, every defensive array is calibrated. In 6 hours, Epsilon Station is going to face the largest fleet in hegemony history. And you're going to face them with an untested neural interface that might destroy your mind. Marcus paused in his preparations and smiled, the same expression he had worn when explaining his impossible plan to defend the station 2 weeks earlier. Zara, I've spent my entire career preparing for this moment. 3 years ago, they tried to kill me and failed. Now they're coming back with everything they have, expecting to finish the job. He returned to his work, his hands moving with practiced precision as he assembled the neural interface device. What they don't understand is that Marcus Chun, the admiral who won the Battle of New Kyoto, was just the beginning. What they're about to face is something new, something that combines human innovation with direct neural control of advanced combat systems. Keth watched him work, recognizing the same focused intensity that had allowed him to transform a civilian space station into an unprecedented war machine. Whatever happened in the next 6 hours, she knew it would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The question was whether humanity would survive long enough to benefit from that transformation. Outside Epsilon Station, space began to ripple with the energy signatures of ships dropping out of hyperspace. The hegemony had arrived, and they had brought enough firepower to reduce entire star systems to ash. But what they found waiting for them wasn't the desperate, outgunned defense force they expected. They found Marcus Chun, and he was ready to remind the galaxy why humanity refused to surrender, no matter how impossible the odds. The neural interface felt like ice water flooding Marcus Chun's consciousness. For a terrifying moment, he wasn't sure where his thoughts ended and the station's systems began. Data streams flowed through his mind like rivers of liquid fire, carrying information about power distribution, weapon status, and the positions of 200 hegemony ships arranging themselves for the final assault on Epsilon Station. Admiral, can you hear me? Commander Keth's voice seemed to come from very far away, though he knew she was standing right beside him in the command center. I can hear everything, Marcus replied, though his voice sounded strange even to himself. Through the neural link, he was simultaneously aware of conversations happening throughout the station, the status of every system from life support to weapons control, and the electromagnetic signatures of the approaching enemy fleet. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Neural interface is stable, reported Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the Earth Defense Force neurotechnician who had overseen the installation. Brain activity is elevated but within acceptable parameters. Admiral, how do you feel? Marcus almost laughed at the question. How did he feel? He felt like a god of war, connected to every weapon system, every defensive array, every sensor on Epsilon Station. He could perceive the enemy fleet not as distant dots on a tactical display, but as living extensions of hostile intent moving through space with predictable patterns. I feel ready, he said simply. The hegemony fleet had arranged itself in a classic bombardment formation, with their heaviest dreadnoughts forming the primary attack line and smaller ships providing escort and fire support. It was textbook strategy designed to overwhelm fixed defenses through concentrated firepower. Fleet Commander Voss, apparently promoted after surviving the first battle, was taking no chances this time. Through the neural interface, Marcus could see the tactical situation with perfect clarity. The hegemony commander had learned from the previous engagement, spreading his ships to prevent the kind of surprise attack that had devastated the First Fleet. He had also brought specialized equipment, including sensors designed to detect hidden weapon systems and countermeasures against unconventional tactics. But Voss was still thinking conventionally. He expected Epsilon Station to defend itself like a fortress, to use its new weapons and defensive systems to make the enemy pay dearly for victory. He had no idea what Marcus had actually built. All stations report ready, Lieutenant Sanders announced. Weapons charged, defensive systems online, gravitational resonance array standing by. Captain Voss, Marcus said, addressing the commander of the Prometheus. Are your ships prepared for the formation we discussed? We're ready, Admiral. Though I have to say, this is either the most brilliant tactical innovation in military history or the most elaborate form of suicide ever devised. Marcus allowed himself a smile. Probably both. Zura, open a channel to the hegemony fleet. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the cold, angular features of Fleet Commander Voss. The family resemblance to Captain Sarah Voss was unmistakable, though where she radiated determined competence, her brother projected the kind of ruthless certainty that characterized hegemony leadership. Admiral Chun, Voss said without preamble, you have caused considerable trouble for the hegemony. This ends now. Commander Voss, Marcus replied. I seem to recall your sister mentioning that you were always the less imaginative member of the family. The hegemony commander's expression didn't change, but Marcus could see the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated anger. Surrender now, and I will make your deaths quick. Continue this futile resistance, and I will ensure that every person on that station dies slowly. Counteroffer, Marcus said pleasantly. Leave this system immediately, and I'll let you retreat with minimal casualties. Stay, and I'll demonstrate why humans are the most dangerous species in known space. Voss's response was to cut the communication channel and begin the bombardment. The space around Epsilon Station erupted in weapon fire as 200 hegemony ships opened up simultaneously. Energy beams, missile barges, and exotic particle weapons filled the void with deadly light, more concentrated firepower than had been deployed in any single engagement in galactic history. It was exactly what Marcus had been waiting for. Now, he said, and through the neural interface, his consciousness spread throughout every system on Epsilon Station. What happened next defied every principle of space combat doctrine. Instead of trying to absorb or deflect the incoming fire, Epsilon Station simply wasn't there when it arrived. The massive structure, weighing millions of tons and containing an entire city's worth of people and equipment, executed a translation maneuver that shifted its position by several thousand kilometers in the space of seconds. The hegemony bombardment struck empty space, their targeting computers unable to compensate for movement that should have been impossible. But Marcus wasn't done. Through the neural interface, he was simultaneously controlling not just Epsilon Station, but every Earth Defense Force ship in the system. The Prometheus and her escorts began moving in perfect coordination, their maneuvers synchronized with inhuman precision as they attacked the hegemony formation from unexpected angles. Multiple contacts maneuvering independently, reported one of the hegemony tactical officers, his voice carrying through intercepted communications. Sir, their coordination is impossible. No command structure can manage this level of tactical complexity. Fleet Commander Voss's voice cut through the chatter, sharp with disbelief and growing concern. All ships, adapt formation for multi-vector attack. Target the station's drive systems. But the hegemony fleet was still thinking in terms of conventional space combat, where ships moved predictably and command decisions took time to implement and execute. They weren't prepared for an enemy that could coordinate dozens of vessels with perfect timing, where every ship moved as part of a single, impossibly complex dance of destruction. Marcus felt the battle flow through his consciousness like a symphony of violence. Through the neural interface, he was aware of every shot fired, every maneuver executed, every system status change across the entire engagement. The sensation was overwhelming and addictive, offering a level of tactical control that no human commander had ever possessed. Epsilon Station continued its impossible ballet, evading fire that should have vaporized it while its weapons systems targeted specific vulnerabilities in the hegemony formation. The hidden armaments that had surprised the first attack were now joined by the advanced systems brought by Captain Voss, creating overlapping fields of fire that caught enemy ships in crossfire patterns they couldn't escape. Direct hit on Hegemony Heavy Cruiser Designation 7, Lieutenant Sanders reported. Their shields are down, and they're venting atmosphere. Confirmed kill on Dreadnought 4, added another tactical officer. Secondary explosions suggest reactor breach. But the real surprise was yet to come. Deep within Epsilon Station, the gravitational resonance weapon that had been installed in the station's core began powering up. The device was experimental, untested in actual combat conditions, and potentially as dangerous to its operators as to the enemy. Marcus didn't care. Through the neural interface, he could perceive the gravitational fields of every ship in the system, could sense the delicate balance of forces that kept massive vessels from tearing themselves apart. The resonance weapon would allow him to disrupt that balance, to turn the hegemony fleet's own momentum against them. Gravitational resonance array at full power, Chief Williams reported. Admiral, we're in uncharted territory here. The effects could be unpredictable. Fire, Marcus said simply. The weapon discharged not with visible energy or explosive force, but with a subtle distortion of space-time itself. Across the hegemony formation, ships that had been maneuvering in perfect order suddenly found themselves caught in gravitational eddies that pulled them off course. Vessels that had been maintaining safe distances from their neighbors were suddenly, on collision courses, their navigational computers unable to compensate for forces they couldn't understand. 3 more hegemony ships collided or suffered catastrophic structural failure as their hulls were subjected to stresses they hadn't been designed to withstand. The carefully organized fleet formation began to break apart as individual commanders struggled to regain control of their vessels. All ships, emergency dispersal, Fleet Commander Voss ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Whatever weapon they're using, get clear of your current positions. But dispersing only made the hegemony fleet more vulnerable to the perfectly coordinated attacks coming from Marcus's neural-linked forces. Individual ships, separated from mutual support, found themselves facing concentrated fire from multiple Earth Defense Force vessels operating with impossible precision. The battle that was supposed to end with the overwhelming destruction of Epsilon Station was turning into a rout. Admiral Dor, Hayes said urgently, monitoring the neural interface readings, your brain activity is approaching dangerous levels. The interface was never designed for this kind of prolonged use. Marcus could feel what she was talking about. The neural link was burning through his consciousness like acid, each moment of connection causing damage that might be irreparable. But he could also see the battle reaching its crucial phase, the moment when the hegemony fleet would either break completely or adapt to his tactics. Just a few more minutes, he said, though he wasn't sure if he spoke aloud or simply thought the words into the neural link. Through the interface, he reached out to systems that existed at the very edge of his perception. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt surrounding the system were automated platforms that had been deployed months earlier, disguised as mining equipment, but actually carrying advanced sensors and weapon systems. The platforms activated simultaneously, revealing the true scope of Marcus's preparations. The hegemony fleet found itself surrounded not just by Epsilon Station and the Earth Defense Force ships, but by a network of hidden installations that had been watching and waiting for exactly this moment. Crossfire erupted from dozens of positions as the automated platforms opened up on the disorganized hegemony ships. Energy beams and missile salvos converged on enemy vessels from every direction, creating a kill zone that no ship could escape. "Sir, we're taking fire from multiple positions," reported a hegemony tactical officer, his voice cracking with stress. "The entire system appears to be fortified." Fleet Commander Voss's response was the sound of a man watching his career and his fleet die simultaneously. "All ships, emergency retreat. Jump to hyperspace immediately." But Marcus had anticipated even this. Through the neural interface, he activated the final component of his trap: hyperspace interdiction fields generated by the hidden platforms. The hegemony ships found their drives disabled, their escape routes blocked by technology that prevented translation to faster-than-light velocities. They were trapped in a system that had become a perfectly orchestrated killing ground. "Commander Voss," Marcus said, opening communication channels to the hegemony flagship, "I'm prepared to offer you the same terms you offered me. Surrender now, and I'll make your deaths quick." The response came not in words, but in a desperate final assault as the surviving hegemony ships threw everything they had at Epsilon Station. It was the dying rage of a predator that had suddenly discovered it was prey, a futile gesture that accomplished nothing except to provide Marcus with targets for the devastating firepower he had assembled. The battle ended not with a climactic explosion or a dramatic last stand, but with the simple mathematics of overwhelming tactical superiority. When the hyperspace interdiction fields finally powered down, less than 30 hegemony ships remained functional enough to retreat. Nearly 200 of the finest vessels in their fleet had been destroyed or crippled by a force they had expected to brush aside without effort. As the surviving enemy ships limped away into hyperspace, Marcus felt the neural interface beginning to shut down automatically. The connection that had given him godlike control over the battle faded, leaving him feeling strangely hollow and disconnected. "Admiral," Commander Keth said urgently, "are you all right?" Marcus tried to respond, but found that simple speech required more effort than controlling an entire fleet. The neural interface had burned pathways through his consciousness that would take time to heal, if they ever did. But he was alive, Epsilon Station was intact, and humanity had just won the most decisive victory in the history of the war. "Dr. Hayes," he managed to say, "how bad is the damage?" The neurotechnician was studying readouts that showed patterns of brain activity unlike anything in medical literature. "Admiral, you've suffered significant neural trauma. The interface pushed your consciousness far beyond normal human parameters. You'll need extensive rehabilitation, and even then, there may be permanent changes." Marcus nodded slowly, accepting the price he had paid for victory. Through the command center's viewport, he could see the debris field that marked the destruction of the hegemony fleet, hundreds of ships that would never again threaten human space. "Commander Keth," he said quietly, "the station is yours now. I won't be able to command anything for quite some time." "Marcus, what you've accomplished here. The galaxy will never be the same." He smiled, though the expression felt strange on a face that was still adjusting to disconnection from the neural link. "Zara, 3 years ago I was just a mechanic. Today, I became something new, something the hegemony never expected to face. Tomorrow, every human in this sector will know that we don't have to accept defeat just because the odds are against us." News of the Battle of Epsilon Station spread across human space within days, carried by merchant ships and military couriers who could barely believe the reports they were transmitting. A single space station, commanded by an admiral who was supposed to be dead, had destroyed the largest fleet the hegemony had ever assembled. More importantly, the tactics and technologies Marcus had developed began spreading to other installations and fleets. Neural interface systems, gravitational resonance weapons, hidden automated platforms, and the concept of weaponized civilian infrastructure all became part of humanity's expanding tactical repertoire. The hegemony, an empire that had ruled the galaxy through overwhelming force and predictable tactics, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that refused to fight fair. Human ships began appearing where they shouldn't be possible, using technologies that defied conventional understanding, commanded by officers who thought like Marcus Chun and fought like they had nothing to lose. The war continued, but its character had fundamentally changed. The hegemony was no longer fighting a species of primitive mammals armed with conventional weapons. They were fighting humanity, and humanity had just proven that they were the most dangerous, innovative, and utterly unpredictable force the galaxy had ever seen. In the medical bay of Epsilon Station, Marcus Chun began the long process of recovery from neural trauma, his mind slowly rebuilding pathways that had been burned away by the interface. But even as he healed, he was already planning the next phase of humanity's evolution. The mechanic was gone forever, destroyed in the fires of impossible victory. In his place stood something new, the architect of a war that would reshape the galaxy and prove once and for all that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their absolute refusal to surrender, no matter how impossible the odds.